The air was thick with the stench of burning metal, plasma discharge, and death. Brian Carter stepped carefully through the wreckage, each step a reminder that the war he had been fighting in was unlike anything humanity had ever expected. The battle had been brutal, the enemy relentless. The Draid, an alien race whose cruelty knew no bounds, had launched a final assault against humanity's last stronghold. Cities had been obliterated, military lines shattered, and any hope of victory seemed impossible. But there was one thing the Draid hadn't counted on: the tenacity of human resolve. Brian, a Marine in the 23rd Combat Division, felt the weight of the war press on his shoulders. The squad he had fought with was gone, torn apart in an instant by the sheer might of the alien forces. His team, his brothers and sisters in arms, now lay scattered like broken toys on the battlefield. Only Brian was left, standing amidst the ruins of what had once been a proud military outpost. The comms were down, the tactical displays blank. Nothing worked. Silence echoed around him, save for the crackling fire and the distant rumble of collapsing structures. He didn't have time to mourn the loss of his comrades. There was still work to be done. There were still enemies to fight, and as long as he was alive, he'd be a thorn in the side of the Draid. Brian's boots crunched over debris, shattered mech parts, spent shell casings, and the twisted remains of combat drones that had once fought beside him. The battlefield was eerily quiet, like the calm before a storm. He had learned to embrace that silence, the kind that comes when you're alone in the midst of destruction. It was a strange peace, and yet a reminder of just how much had been lost. He adjusted the strap of his Mark 7 plasma rifle, the hum of the power cell offering a small comfort in this hellhole. As he moved through the desolation, his eyes scanned every corner, every shadow, expecting the worst. The Draid were known for their brutal efficiency, and it wouldn't take much for them to spot him. The sudden beep of his combat suit's environmental sensor cut through his thoughts. Movement. Ahead. Slow. Deliberate. Just beyond the smoke. And debris. Brian's hand immediately went to his rifle, his muscles tensing, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Then he saw it. A figure. A woman. She lay half-buried under a pile of rubble. Her silvery hair, glowing faintly against the gray ground, spread like a fan. The color of her skin wasn't human, wasn't anything earthly, really. A lavender-gray hue that shimmered in the dust. Brian knew immediately who she was. A Lazarian. One of humanity's strongest allies in the war against the Draid. His heart skipped a beat. A Lazarian warrior. Alone. Brian's eyes darted around, trying to process the scene. What was she doing here? Why was she alone? The Lazarians were a highly trained and capable force, and the fact that one of them had been left behind, abandoned, meant only one thing. Their forces had been overwhelmed. Instinct took over. Brian moved toward her cautiously, his rifle raised, keeping a watchful eye on his surroundings. The last thing he needed was to be ambushed by more Draid. But the woman didn't seem like an immediate threat. Her body language suggested she was unconscious, or worse, injured. As he knelt beside her, the harsh truth hit him. She was alive, but barely. Her eyes fluttered open as he neared. There was no recognition in her gaze, just the fading remnants of life. Her voice, when she spoke, was strained, but there was an undeniable strength in it. "Don't move," she whispered, her eyes locking onto his. "You're a human." Brian's heart sank. She was one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, and here she was, paralyzed by injury, lying helplessly in a war zone. She shouldn't have been alive, yet there she was. And if he didn't help her, she wouldn't be for much longer. "I'm Sergeant Brian Carter," he said, his voice steady. "Earth Marine Corps, you're safe now." Her eyes glinted for a moment, though pain was evident in them. "Kira Banis," she rasped. "3rd Strike Force." The words came with a certain weight. Brian recognized the name. 3rd Strike Force was one of the most elite units the Lazarians had. Brian felt a strange, painful twist in his gut. If 3rd Strike Force was here, it meant the war was closer to its end than anyone had imagined. The Lazarians, one of the most powerful forces allied with humanity, were now facing complete annihilation. Her next words confirmed it. I can't feel my legs. A shudder ran through Brian, his mind racing. He quickly checked his medical scanner. Her spinal cord had been severely damaged. The prognosis wasn't good. She was beyond saving by any conventional means. But not to him. Not yet. Not if he could help it. His tactical display flickered on his wrist, showing movement from the enemy, Draid patrols closing in from the north. Brian's pulse quickened. He was on his own, with a paralyzed alien warrior. The Draid were seconds away from overrunning his position. The military protocol for situations like this was clear. Leave the immobile behind. Save yourself. But there was no way he was leaving her. No way he was going to let a fellow soldier die alone. Don't move, Kira whispered again, her voice almost a plea. There's no time. Just leave me. But Brian shook his head. Like hell I will, he growled, his eyes darkening with determination. I didn't survive this expletive just to leave someone behind. Kira's expression softened for a moment. A faint smile tugged at her lips. Stubborn human, she whispered. Brian carefully moved to free her from the rubble, his muscles working as he lifted her with surprising ease, even with the weight of his armor. There was no time to waste. He knew it wasn't smart. They were walking straight into danger. But it didn't matter. His instincts screamed at him to keep her alive, to get her to safety. I didn't survive this hell just to leave someone behind, he muttered under his breath, moving quickly through the wreckage, the weight of her body against his. This wasn't just a war for survival anymore. It was something bigger, a fight for something that transcended planets, races, and species. For a moment, it felt like the universe itself was watching, waiting to see if humanity was truly capable of the impossible, and Brian Carter, Marine of Earth, wasn't about to let it down. The quiet of the battlefield was suffocating. The sounds of distant explosions and the crackle of fires that still burned across the wreckage were the only things that broke the silence. Brian Carter was used to the noise of war, the hum of weapons charging, the roar of distant artillery, the shouts of his comrades. But now, all of that had fallen silent, and he was left alone with his thoughts and the weight of his decision. He carried Kira with ease, her body limp in his arms, but the strain was starting to show. His suit's enhanced muscles were holding up, but even his augmented strength had its limits. They had no time to stop, no time to catch their breath. The Draid were closing in. Brian's sensors flickered weakly, showing multiple enemy signatures just beyond his immediate vicinity. Every second that ticked by brought them closer to death. Kira's breathing was steady, though shallow, and she didn't speak. Brian had no idea if she was even conscious anymore, but he couldn't afford to think about that now. His focus was on getting them both out of there, away from the battle, away from the chaos, even if it meant he would have to fight through the entire Draid army to make it happen. Every movement he made was deliberate, calculated. His rifle was slung across his back, but his hand remained near the trigger, ready for anything. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations, considering all the possible escape routes. But as he moved through the rubble, there was no safe place. Not anymore. Why am I doing this? Brian muttered to himself, though there was no one to hear him. He had spent years fighting, years following orders without question. He had been trained to leave no one behind. But this felt different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about something bigger, something that transcended race, something that, in all honesty, he couldn't fully comprehend. His eyes flickered over the carnage around him. The twisted metal, the shattered concrete, Everything he had fought for seemed to be crumbling away in front of him. And yet, here he was, carrying a paralyzed Lazarian warrior across a battlefield, with every possible threat closing in. Human instinct to survive was strong, but there was something more in Brian now. A feeling he hadn't expected. Responsibility. To her. To something greater than himself. He couldn't just leave her behind. Not when she had fought alongside. Humanity. Not when she had bled for this cause. Kira stirred slightly, her silvery hair brushing against Brian's cheek. Her voice, though weak, reached his ears. "You're still carrying me." Brian's heart skipped a beat. She was awake. Her voice was weak, but the words brought a strange relief. "I told you," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm not leaving you." She let out a soft sigh, and for a moment Brian thought she might fall back into unconsciousness. But then her voice came again, this time laced with something almost like a smile. Stubborn human. Brian grinned despite the situation, a small, genuine smile breaking through the tension. "You haven't seen stubborn yet, sweetheart." Her laugh was faint, but it echoed through the quiet of the battlefield like a momentary burst of life in the middle of a dying world. Brian didn't let himself dwell on the fragility of that sound. He had to keep moving. Every second was a risk, and he couldn't afford to lose her now. His tactical display flickered again, and Brian's heart rate picked up. 3 Draid warriors were advancing in their direction, moving swiftly across the broken terrain. He had seconds, maybe less, to act. "Stay low," Brian whispered, shifting to a crouch as he moved to a partially destroyed mech, using it as cover. Kira's hands gripped his shoulder weakly, her body still trembling from pain, but she nodded, her alien eyes scanning the horizon with unnatural precision. Despite her injuries, she was still a warrior at heart. 2 to the left, Kira murmured, her voice steady despite the situation. 1 to the right. They're trying to box us in. Brian's heart raced. Her senses, honed by years of combat, were still sharper than his own. He appreciated her tactical knowledge more than she would ever know. "Nice," he said quietly. "Any ideas on how we get out of this?" She paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "Flank them. The mech's blind spot will cover us for a few seconds. You can take out the one on the right, but we need to move fast." Brian nodded, his mind already working the plan. He adjusted his grip on Kira, making sure she was secure before peeking over the mech. The Draid were almost too close now. There was no room for error. He had one shot at this. With a swift motion, he pulled out his plasma rifle and fired, the Giu bolt of blue light striking the Draid warrior on the right. The explosion sent shrapnel flying, taking out the other Draid in the vicinity. Kira's eyes narrowed, her sharp mind instantly calculating their next move. "Go!" Kira urged, her voice louder now, stronger than before. Brian didn't hesitate. With a burst of speed, he darted from behind cover, pulling Kira with him. The moment they were clear, he stopped, his heart pounding. The Draid might be dead, but there were more out there. Too many to count. They had made it this far, but for how much longer? Would they ever make it to safety, or was this just a fleeting moment before the inevitable? Brian didn't have the answers. He only knew that he had to keep moving. For Kira. For humanity. And as they continued their fight for survival, one thing was certain. They were no longer just fighting for the future of their people. They were fighting for each other. The Draid might have underestimated humanity before. But now, as Brian and Kira moved as one, they were about to show their enemies exactly what it meant to mess with human. The battlefield had become a twisted labyrinth of dust, shattered steel, and fire. A chaotic scene that mirrored the chaos inside Brian's mind. As he moved through the wreckage, Kira's weight in his arms felt like both a burden and a lifeline. The quiet buzz of his plasma rifle on his back was the only sound he could focus on. The hum of technology in an otherwise dead world. Everything felt off, the air too still, the tension too thick, like the calm before the storm. The Draid had been relentless, and Brian knew they wouldn't stop until they had wiped out every last human and ally. Yet, here he was, carrying a paralyzed Lazarian warrior across a shattered battlefield, trying to keep one step ahead of the very enemy that had decimated his squad. There was no safety, no refuge. There was only survival. But survival wasn't enough. Not anymore. He had to protect her. He had to save Kira. "Stay low," Brian whispered again, his voice barely audible over the wind and the occasional groan of collapsing buildings. He adjusted his grip on Kira, her body lighter now, the adrenaline of battle coursing through him. His mind raced with the same questions, the same doubts. Why had he made this choice? What if it was a mistake? And yet, every time he thought about leaving her behind, the answer came back the same. No, he couldn't. Not after everything she had done. Not after the sacrifices made in the name of survival. Kira's eyes, still sharp despite the blood loss and the obvious pain, scanned the terrain around them. Her fingers tightened briefly on his shoulder, a silent signal that she was still with him, still alert. They moved in tandem now, a human marine and a Lazarian warrior, bound by a shared will to survive. 3 incoming, Kira murmured softly, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. Her eyes gleamed with a warrior's focus, piercing through the smoke and dust. 1 on the left, 2 flanking from the right. They're trying to trap us. Brian nodded, his pulse quickening. They had no time for hesitation. The Draid didn't give mercy. They only took it. Every move, every second counted now. Brian's fingers tightened on the rifle's grip, the weapon's weight a comforting presence against his back. He could hear the faint sounds of movement, boots crunching over broken concrete, the unmistakable hum of alien energy weapons charging. The Draid were getting closer. "Cover me," Brian muttered, more to himself than to Kira. "I'll take the left." Kira didn't need further explanation. Despite her injury, she knew what had to be done. Her alien instincts were as sharp as ever, and she had been through countless battles like this before. Even as she was physically vulnerable, her mind was still a weapon, one that Brian was learning to rely on more than he ever expected. They split as one, moving in perfect harmony despite the chaos. Brian darted toward the left, the soft crunch of his boots muffled by the thick layers of dust. He could hear Kira behind him, her body moving with grace and precision, even in the midst of pain. She was still a warrior. She always would be. The Draid didn't know what was coming. The first alien soldier, flanked to the left, never saw Brian's plasma rifle coming. In one fluid motion, Brian pulled the trigger, the blue beam streaking through the air and catching the Draid warrior square in the chest. The alien let out a mechanical hiss as it was thrown backward, its armor cracking open under the force of the shot. Brian didn't stop. His heart raced, his breath steady as he scanned the battlefield, knowing that the others would be coming soon. Kira's voice filtered through his mind, her sharp, tactical mind providing the vital intel he needed. 2 more on the right, she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Watch the flanks. I've got your 6. He didn't need to tell her what to do. Kira was already moving, her silhouette a blur as she repositioned herself. Her laser blades hummed to life, the glowing energy of her weapon pulsing in the dim light of the battlefield. Brian couldn't help but watch for a moment. Her elegance in combat was unlike anything he had ever seen. She was more than just a warrior. She was a force of nature. With a grunt, Brian turned and moved into position, his rifle raised and ready. He could see the 2 Draid soldiers now, moving in quick, calculated strides. They were setting up for a pincer maneuver, trying to corner him from both sides, but they hadn't counted on Kira. As one Draid moved into position, it didn't see Kira until it was too late. Her energy blade flashed out, cutting through the air with surgical precision. The first Draid soldier didn't even have time to react before Kira's blade cleaved through its armor, sending sparks flying as it collapsed in a heap. Brian didn't waste time admiring her work. He squeezed the trigger, firing a plasma bolt that tore through the second Draid, the explosion sending the alien flying backward. Kira's voice filled his ears again, her words punctuated with the satisfaction of a fight well fought. "Nice shot, Marine. Now let's move." Brian didn't need to be told twice. He was already moving, quickly scanning the area for threats. The Draid had been wiped out for now, but there was no time to relax. They were far from safe. "Head to the transport," Kira ordered, pointing toward a partially destroyed military vehicle in the distance. It was their only chance for escape. A fully functional transport meant they might have a shot at getting out of this hellhole alive. Brian nodded, his heart pounding with renewed urgency. But as they made their way toward the transport, he could feel the weight of the decision settling deeper. Every step they took brought them closer to safety, but it also brought them closer to something else, something neither of them could predict. They were in this together. For better or worse, their survival now hinged on each other. And as they moved through the wreckage, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, this was only the beginning of something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The battle for survival was just the first step. The wreckage of the battlefield stretched out in every direction, an unrecognizable maze of twisted metal and burning debris. As Brian and Kira moved through the ruins, their bodies pushed to the limits of exhaustion, the weight of their situation began to settle deeper. Each step they took toward the transport vehicle in the distance felt like a fleeting chance, a single thread holding them above the abyss of total destruction. The distant hum of enemy patrols still echoed in Brian's ears, a constant reminder that the Draid were never far behind. They were closing in, relentlessly sweeping the area, hunting for any signs of life, any remaining survivors. Brian's tactical display was barely functional, flickering sporadically with static as the last of their communication systems lay in ruins. He couldn't afford to rely on technology now. His instincts, his training, and Kira's sharp senses were all he had left. Kira's breathing was steady, though her movements were slower, weighed down by the damage to her spine. She had remained silent for most of the journey, but Brian could feel her presence next to him, the slight tension in her body as she adjusted to the pain. Despite her injuries, she was still a warrior, still fighting even though her body had betrayed her. Almost there. Brian muttered under his breath, his hand tightening on his rifle as they neared the transport. Kira's eyes flickered toward him, her expression unreadable. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said softly, though her voice lacked the usual sharpness. "You should have left me. I'm a burden." Brian's jaw clenched. He didn't respond immediately, unwilling to give voice to the bitter truth that haunted him. Should I have left her behind? The thought had crossed his mind more than once, but the answer always came back the same. No. Kira was more than just a soldier to him now. She was more than just an ally. Her strength, her courage, it had become a part of him. And no matter how many enemies were closing in, no matter how impossible the odds, Brian wasn't going to walk away from her. Not like this. "You're not a burden," Brian finally said, his voice firm, though the weight of his words didn't feel like enough. "I made a choice, and I'm sticking with it. You're not getting left behind." Kira's lips pressed together, but she didn't argue. Instead, she simply nodded. The words were unspoken, but the shared understanding was there between them. She had seen the depths of the destruction, the brutality of the Draid. And yet somehow, despite everything that had happened, she trusted him. Trust. The thought was a fleeting one. In the middle of this war zone, amidst the chaos of enemy forces and the impending threat of death, trust felt like a distant memory. And yet, here they were. Two warriors from different worlds, bound by something stronger than mere survival. The bond they shared now wasn't just about fighting together. It was about something more. Something neither of them fully understood. Yet, the transport came into view. A battered military-grade vehicle half sunk in a crater, its hull scorched from the battle. It was their only shot at survival, and it wasn't much of a chance at all. Still, it was better than nothing. Brian could feel his heart rate spike. They were so close, but danger was still lurking. They had no idea how many Draid were in the area, how many patrols were still hunting them. The silence around them was deafening, broken only by the distant rumblings of collapsing buildings and the occasional screech of a dying mech. His mind raced with possibilities. Should they wait? Should they move in quickly, take the risk and try to get inside the transport? It didn't matter. The Draid wouldn't give them that luxury. As if on cue, Brian's tactical display crackled to life, a new warning flashing. Across his visor, incoming hostiles. 3 signatures. No. 4. Move now, Brian snapped, his voice sharp with urgency. He didn't need to explain further. Kira was already moving, pushing through the pain, her energy blade flashing to life with a soft hum. Despite her condition, she was still a force to be reckoned with. They darted toward the transport, the ground shaking beneath them as more explosions echoed in the distance. The Draid had already picked up their trail. There was no more time to waste. Brian reached the transport first, crouching low as he tried to assess the situation. The vehicle's hull was partially compromised, but it could still be used. The access hatch was blocked, half destroyed by the blast that had taken out the surrounding area. The vehicle's systems were dead, but the emergency lighting flickered, weakly, offering a sliver of hope. "We need to get inside," Brian said, his voice low but resolute. Kira arrived next to him, her breath ragged but steady. "We won't survive out here," she agreed, her eyes scanning the area for movement. Her alien senses were still alert, even through the haze of pain that clouded her body. "But we can't just barge in. They're going to be looking for us." Brian's hands tightened on his rifle, the weight of his choices heavier now. The Draid would be there any moment, and they were both in prime position to be picked off if they didn't act fast. There was no easy way out of this one. "We're getting in now?" His voice was firm, final. Without waiting for a response, Brian quickly moved to the back of the transport, his hands working to clear the debris blocking the hatch. Each movement was calculated, precise, as though his life depended on it, because it did. The seconds felt like hours, and every second spent outside was a chance for the Draid to corner them. Kira crouched beside him, her energy blade still crackling with power. Her eyes flicked toward the horizon. "They're close. Too close." "I know," Brian muttered, his mind working faster than his hands. The hatch finally gave way with a screech, and he quickly shoved it open. The interior of the transport was dark, cold, and abandoned, much like the world outside. But it was better than the alternative. As Brian helped Kira inside, the sound of Draid footsteps grew louder, echoing through the dust-filled air. The storm was coming, but they were inside now. The door slammed shut behind them, and the last thing Brian heard before the world went silent again was Kira's voice, soft but determined. "Let's see if this transport has a fight left in it." In this part, I focused on heightening the tension and making their pursuit feel desperate, while showing the internal struggles of both characters as they fight for survival. The weight of their choices and their bond is central, pushing them forward even when everything seems hopeless. The interior of the transport was stark, cold, and unfamiliar. Emergency lights flickered dimly overhead, casting eerie shadows across the cracked and scorched metal walls. Brian could feel the tension in the air, the kind that comes just before a storm hits, when everything seems to hold its breath in anticipation. The vehicle, though battered and abandoned, was their best hope for escape. Yet, the silence that hung between him and Kira was almost deafening. They were both physically exhausted, their bodies pushed to the limit. But there was more at play than just their survival. Something deeper was at the core of their existence now, something that would change everything. Brian leaned against the cold walls of the transport, his hands still gripping his plasma rifle. He wiped the sweat from his brow, not sure if it was the heat from the battle or the weight of the decisions he'd made weighing him down. Despite everything they had been through, there was still one looming question. Why had he risked it all for her? He turned to look at Kira. She was sitting against the far wall, her body slumped from the injuries that still ravaged her. The silver of her hair caught the faint light, and the usual fire in her storm-gray eyes seemed dimmer now, clouded by pain and exhaustion. But there was something else in her gaze, something that Brian could feel through the air between them. It was the same thing that had kept him going when every instinct told him to abandon their mission, to run for his own life. She wasn't just an ally anymore. She wasn't just a comrade in arms. She had become something else. Kira caught his gaze, her lips curving into a faint smile. It was barely there, but it spoke volumes. "Did you ever think it would end like this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the pain lacing her words. Brian chuckled softly, the sound hollow in the quiet of the transport. "No, not like this." They both knew the truth. No one had ever expected this war to end. No one had predicted the alien alliance, the unexpected camaraderie between humans and Lazarians. And no one had expected Brian Carter, just another Marine from Earth, to be standing in the heart of enemy territory, trying to save a paralyzed alien warrior. Yet, here they were. Together. "I didn't expect to be carrying a Lazarian princess out of a battlefield either," Brian said, trying to lighten the mood, his eyes still fixed on Kira. Her smile widened just a fraction, the faintest flicker of humor breaking through the veil of pain. "You humans always have a knack for getting yourselves into trouble. But I suppose it's why we work together so well." The words hit Brian like a punch to the gut. We work together well. He stared at Kira, watching her with a renewed sense of understanding. They were more than just two soldiers from different worlds fighting side by side. There was something else now, something that neither of them had asked for but could not deny. The hum of the transport's emergency systems was the only sound filling the air. Brian shifted uncomfortably, the realization of what he was about to do crashing down on him. He couldn't avoid it anymore. "We can't stay here for long," he said, though the words felt empty. They both knew that the Draid would come for them soon enough. But this wasn't just about escape anymore. Kira looked up at him, her storm-gray eyes steadied despite the overwhelming odds. "You've got a plan, don't you?" she asked, a hint of quiet hope in her voice. Brian swallowed hard, looking down at her. "There's a medical pod on this transport," he said, the words coming slowly, as if he were still debating whether or not to say them aloud. "I can try to get you into it. It'll give you a chance to heal. But I won't lie to you, Kira. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick." Kira was silent for a moment, her gaze flicking down toward the floor of the transport, as though weighing the gravity of his words. Her lips parted, but before she could respond, Brian spoke again, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. "I can't just leave you. I won't leave you. But this could be our only shot at making it out alive." Her expression softened, and for the first time she seemed to truly study him, her eyes searching his face as though looking for something. Maybe for answers, maybe for hope. "I know," she whispered. "But Brian, there's something you need to understand about Lazarian healing technology." He felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean?" Kira closed her eyes for a brief moment, her voice filled with an undeniable weight. "Our healing technology isn't like anything you've seen. It's intimate. The bond it creates between the patient and the operator is more than just physical. It connects us on a deeper level, emotionally, mentally. And once it's activated, it doesn't just heal injuries. It alters us. It changes us. Brian didn't know what to say. The thought of a bond between them was almost too much to process. He had only just started to understand the depths of the connection they had formed in the midst of this hellish battlefield, and now she was telling him it would go even further. That whatever happened next, they would be bound, forever. "I'm warning you because you need to know what this means," Kira continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you help me, if you choose to use this technology, it won't just heal me. It'll change you too. It'll create a bond between us, one that's permanent. And once it happens, there's no going back. You'll feel everything I feel. We'll be connected." Brian was silent, his mind whirling. Connected. It was hard to imagine, let alone comprehend. He had barely come to terms with the idea of saving her, of continuing to fight by her side. Now, the choice had become more than just about survival. It was about something else entirely. Something he didn't fully understand, but something that felt more real with every passing second. Kira's eyes met his, a quiet resolve in her gaze. "It's your choice, Marine. You don't have to do this. I understand if you can't." Brian's pulse raced as the weight of her words settled deep into his bones. He had no idea what the future held. No idea how the bond she spoke of would change them. Change him. But what he did know, what he felt deep inside his chest, was that this was no longer about just saving one life. This was about choosing something that could change everything. Brian inhaled sharply and made his decision. "I'm not leaving you, Kira. Not now. Not ever." Her smile was faint, but it reached her eyes. And in that moment, Brian knew that whatever happened next, whatever changes this bond would bring, it was the only choice he could make. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would survive. The transport's interior was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just outside. Yet even in this artificial silence, Brian could feel the weight of the choice he had made pressing down on him. He could hear Kira's shallow breaths, each one an echo of her pain. But beneath that, there was something else, something far more unsettling. It was the quiet hum of the medical pod systems, the faint glow of its lights, the promise of something that could heal her, but also transform everything between them. As Brian approached the pod, his fingers hovering above the control panel, he hesitated. He was about to do something irrevocable, something that would bind him to Kira in ways he couldn't fully understand. It wasn't just the danger of the Draid closing in that had his heart pounding. It was the uncertainty of what this bond would mean for him and for them. Kira, sensing his hesitation, looked up at him, her storm-gray eyes reflecting a flicker of pain, but also something deeper, trust, maybe even hope. She reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his skin, despite the fact that her body was still trembling with injury. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice softer now, vulnerable in a way that Brian had never heard from her before. "It's not just healing. It's a bond that changes everything. Once we do this, it's forever." Brian's breath caught in his chest. Her words were a heavy weight, and he could feel the pull of them. She was giving him an out, an easy way out. He could just leave her here, take his chances and run. It would be safer, easier, but something deep within him, the part that had carried him through countless battles, the part that had made him swear to protect those who fought by his side, told him there was no turning back now. "I'm not leaving you behind, Kira," Brian said, his voice steady, but his hands betraying the tension he felt inside. "Whatever this means, I'm with you. I won't abandon you." Kira's lips curved into a soft, tired smile. "You really are stubborn, aren't you?" "Maybe," Brian muttered, trying to brush off the knot in his stomach. "But I've learned that sometimes stubbornness is what keeps you alive, and I'm not walking away from this fight." With that, He turned toward the medical pod. The display flickered to life, showing a series of runes in a language he didn't recognize, a series of commands and diagnostics flashing across the screen. Kira had explained the process before, but now, standing on the edge of it, it seemed so much more real, more intimidating. The pod would connect their biological signatures, creating an intimate bond. Healing, yes, but at the cost of their individuality, of their privacy, of everything they had known before. Kira's voice broke through his thoughts, calm but firm. Activate it, Brian. The sooner we do this, the sooner I can heal, and the sooner we can get out of here. He nodded, swallowing hard, and placed his hand on the activation panel. The moment his fingers made contact, the pod's systems whirred to life, the soft hum growing louder. A pale light filled the room, casting an ethereal glow over their surroundings. Brian watched as Kira's body, still battered and bruised, was gently lifted into the pod, her silver hair spreading out like liquid metal around her. His heart raced. He couldn't explain why, but the air felt thicker now. He felt something else in the room, something beyond the tech and beyond the immediate danger. A sense of connection, an invisible thread linking him to Kira in a way that words couldn't describe. "You ready for this?" Brian asked, his voice strained with the anticipation of what was about to happen. Kira nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "As ready as I'll ever be." He stepped forward, moving into the pod beside her, and immediately the chamber sealed them in. The lights dimmed, and a soft, almost melodic hum filled the air. Brian's body tensed as he felt the first stirrings of the bond Kira had warned him about. The air around them seemed to vibrate with energy, the atmosphere thick with the promise of something transformative. He felt it first in his chest, a soft warmth, like the sensation of being pulled toward her. Then it spread through his body, like a ripple in water, moving from his chest to his limbs, his fingers. And then it happened. He could feel Kira. Not just her presence, not just the warmth of her body against his. He could feel her thoughts, her emotions, her pain. It was as though he had opened a door into her mind, and now he was standing on the other side. He could feel her fear, the deep, unspoken terror of being helpless, of relying on someone else to save her. He could feel her determination, her will to survive, to fight for her people and her allies. And most of all, he could feel her gratitude, a deep, quiet thankfulness that she had someone like him with her, someone who wouldn't abandon her, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And then something shifted. Brian felt a rush of warmth, of connection, and it wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional. He could feel her, truly feel her. It wasn't just her pain anymore. It was her strength, her memories, the essence of who she was, coursing through him. He wasn't just connected to her in some abstract way anymore. He was inside her, experiencing everything she was, as though their souls had intertwined. Kira gasped, her body tensing as the process accelerated. "Brian, do you feel that?" Her voice echoed in his mind, a direct link between them now, so close that it almost felt like they were one. "I feel you," Brian whispered, his voice trembling, both in awe and fear. "I feel everything. Everything." Her heart rate spiked, and for a moment, Brian thought it might be too much. But then, he felt her stabilizing. The pain in her body lessened, the damage healing in real time. Her spine, though still fragile, was slowly mending, the cracks and breaks knitting themselves back together. The pod's energy, combined with their newfound connection, was repairing what had seemed beyond repair. As the process continued, Brian's own body began to change. He could feel his senses sharpening, his reflexes enhancing. It was as though Kira's strength, her Lazarian traits, were merging with his own human form. He wasn't just human anymore. He was something more. And Kira wasn't just a paralyzed alien warrior. She was now a part of him. And he, a part of her. The bond was real. It was alive. Brian could feel her presence in every thought, every action. It was a shared consciousness, something deeper than anything he had ever experienced. And through it all, despite the overwhelming power of the connection, one thing became crystal clear. They were no longer just two soldiers from different worlds. They were something entirely new, something stronger, and they would fight together. Forever. As the pod hummed to a stop, the light fading to a soft, dim glow, Brian opened his eyes. He could see Kira, her body healed, her strength returning. But it wasn't just her body that had changed. He could see it in her eyes, the same look that reflected in his own. Together, they had crossed a threshold, and the world around them, once filled with uncertainty, suddenly felt full of possibilities. The transport was silent now, save for the hum of the medpod's energy systems, still pulsing faintly in the background. Brian's hands trembled as he adjusted his grip on his plasma rifle, his mind still reeling from the transformation that had just occurred. The bond between him and Kira was no longer just a fleeting connection. It was something permanent, something undeniable. Every thought, every emotion, every sensation felt magnified, shared, and deeply intertwined with hers. It was as though the line between them had dissolved, leaving only the connection. Kira sat beside him, her posture more upright now, the silver of her hair shimmering in the dim light of the transport. Her eyes, once clouded with pain, were clearer now, brighter even. There was a strength in her gaze that hadn't been there before, a quiet, unspoken understanding. She had healed, yes, but more than that, she had changed, and so had he. Brian took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with the movement of the air inside the transport. The familiar, comforting weight of his rifle in his hands grounded him. Yet, despite the familiar sensation, nothing felt the same. He could still feel Kira beside him, her every breath, her every heartbeat, pulsing through his own body. Her presence was real, more real than anything he had ever known. "You know, I never imagined this," Brian said softly, breaking the silence. His voice was strained, a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "That I'd end up like this." Kira glanced at him, her lips curving into a slight smile, her eyes glimmering with the same mixture of emotions that he felt. "We're not exactly the pair anyone expected, are we?" she replied, her voice warm with both amusement and something deeper, a connection, a shared experience that was growing between them by the second. Brian's pulse quickened as her words registered. She was right. They were no longer just allies. They were more than that now. More than just a human marine and a Lazarian warrior. They were one in a way that defied explanation. "It's strange," Brian continued, his voice barely above, a whisper. "I've fought in wars, bled for my people, but this feels different. Like I'm seeing the world with new eyes, or maybe feeling it is more accurate." Kira's gaze softened, and she reached out to touch his arm lightly. The simple gesture sent a ripple of warmth through his chest, something that went deeper than just physical contact. It was as though her touch resonated with him on a molecular level, sending a wave of familiarity and understanding crashing over him. "I understand," she murmured. "I feel it too. We're connected now, Brian. In ways that are beyond what either of us could have imagined." Brian looked at her, his heart racing. He could feel her heartbeat, as if it were his own. And in that moment, it became clear to him, the gravity of what they had just done. They weren't just two beings from different worlds anymore. They were something new, something unprecedented. Their minds, their souls, had merged in a way that had never been done before. Kira's expression grew serious, her eyes darkening as she looked out the transport's window. "They'll come for us," she said, her voice laced with both resolve and a quiet fear. "The Draid won't stop until they have us, until they wipe out what they can't control." Brian's jaw tightened. He didn't need to ask who she meant. The Draid had been relentless in their pursuit of humanity's extinction, and now, with the bond between him and Kira, they would have an even bigger target on their backs. But there was something else now. Something different. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for a future that had never been possible before. For the first time, they could see beyond the violence, beyond the bloodshed. They could see the possibility of something greater. "We'll fight them together," Brian said firmly, his voice taking on a newfound strength. "I'm not backing down. Not now. Not ever." Kira nodded, her eyes narrowing as the weight of their words settled between them. She was no longer just a warrior. She was part of him now, and he, part of her. Together they were stronger than they had ever been, their connection a weapon, a shield, and a force of nature all in one. Her lips parted slightly, and her voice softened, carrying the weight of their shared resolve. "We've already defied the odds, Brian. We've already done the impossible. The Draid won't know what hit them." For a moment, Brian allowed himself to believe it, really believe it. They had done the impossible before, and now they had a chance to do it again. Together they could take on anything. Together they would be unstoppable. As the transport hummed softly in the background, Brian's gaze shifted to the horizon, his mind filled with the faintest hope. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't seem quite so bleak. Whatever came next, whatever enemies awaited them, he knew one thing for certain. They would face it as one. They would face it together. And the Draid, they didn't stand a chance.